There's that. Okay, let's open with prayer. Lord, we thank you for this new day, and we thank you for the chance to continue through the book of Ezekiel. We ask that you would give us your spirit, and that you would bless the work that we do. So hear our prayer in the name of Jesus. Amen. Okay, we're done with Ezekiel 16, and we're off to Ezekiel chapter 17. Another interesting little story. Quite different from 16. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, set forth an allegory, and tell it to the Israelites as a parable. Say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. A great eagle with powerful wings, long feathers, and full plumage of varied colors came to Lebanon. Taking hold of the top of a cedar, he broke off its topmost shoot and carried it away to a land of merchants, where he planted it in a city of traders. He took one of the seedlings of the land and put it in fertile soil. He planted it like a willow by abundant water, and it sprouted and became a low spreading vine. Its branches turned towards him, but its root remained under it. So it became a vine and produced branches and put out leafy boughs. But there was another great eagle with powerful wings and full plumage. The vine now sent out its roots towards him from the plot where it was planted and stretched out its branches to him for water. It had been planted in good soil by abundant water so that it could produce branches, bear fruit, and become a splendid vine. Say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Will it thrive? Will it not be uprooted and stripped of its fruit so that it withers? All its new growth will wither. It will not take a strong arm or many people to pull it up by its roots. It has been planted, but will it thrive? Will it not wither completely when the east wind strikes it? Wither away in the plot where it grew? Then the word of the Lord came to me. Say to this rebellious people, do you not know what these things mean? Say to them, the king of Babylon went to Jerusalem and carried off her king and her nobles, bringing them back with him to Babylon. Then he took a member of the royal family and made a treaty with him, putting him under oath. He carried away the leading men of the land, so that the kingdom will be brought low, unable to rise again, surviving only by keeping his treaty. But the king rebelled against him by sending his envoys to Egypt to get horses and a large army. Will he succeed? Will he who does such things escape? Will he break the treaty and yet escape? As surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, he shall die in Babylon, in the land of the king who put him on the throne, whose oath he despised and whose treaty he broke. Pharaoh with his mighty army and great horde will be of no help to him, when ramps are built and when siege engines erected to destroy many lives. He despised the oath by breaking the covenant. Because he had given his hand in pledge, and yet did all these things, he will not escape. Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says. As surely as I live, I will repay him for despising my oath and breaking my covenant. I will spread my net for him, and he will be caught in my snare. I will bring him to Babylon and execute judgment on him there because he was unfaithful to me. All his choice troops will fall by the sword, and the survivors will be scattered to the winds. Then you will know that I have spoken. This is what the sovereign Lord says. I myself will take a shoot from the very top of a cedar and plant it. I will break off a tender sprig from its topmost shoots and plant it on a high and lofty mountain. On the mountain heights of Israel, I will plant it. It will produce branches and bear fruit and become a splendid cedar. Birds of every kind will nest in it. They will find shelter in the shade of its branches. All the trees of the forest will know that I, the Lord, bring down the tall tree and make the low tree grow tall. I dry up the green tree and make the dry tree flourish. I, the Lord, have spoken, and I will do it. All right. What do you think of this little story? What do you think it means?
Well, it means how the vine grow and how it grows and then into trees and produce fruit. But it doesn't say what kind of fruit though. And I'm thinking, okay, is this back to talking about the grapevines again?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But then of course here, go ahead. In my footnotes, it did mention about, back to chapter 15, and where, as far as I'm concerned, where prophet first started talking about the useless vine.
Mm-hmm.
Now, these vines are not useless because they do grow and they are strong.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like something was mentioned about wood,
Mm-hmm.
but I'll be talking too much.
No, that's fine.
But what kind of wood and is the wood useful? But all in all, I'm like, okay, are we going back to talk about the what it means in some references as far as Jerusalem and Babylon
Mm-hmm.
and all of those. So, it's kind of not say puzzling, but yet, it brings in a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway.
Well, I know when I was much, much younger, I'm 67 now, going on 68, and I guess I was maybe about 13, a little younger than that. And I was gonna try to read the Bible on my own.
Mm-hmm.
Became very difficult, because one of the things about this is you kind of read literal,
Mm-hmm.
but this is in so many parables,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a comparison to something that you would know.
Mm-hmm.
So, and at 13, it wasn't comparing much that I knew. I had to kind of like pick up the book, put the book down.
Mm-hmm.
But now you can see that when it mentioned vine, it's talking to the people, but talking about the people, but using something that everyone would recognize.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because a vine, a tree, does have roots. Those roots spread out.
Mm-hmm.
If they're not strong, the tree falls over. If they're strong, the tree just keep going up and up and up.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I look at this. It's referring to something that all the people there would recognize, because most of them was farmers.
Mm-hmm.
But it's talking about his people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They come in all colors and everything. They're supposed to be following what he laid down in the covenant, but
Mm-hmm.
he's telling them with the reference that you're not, and this is what happens to a tree. This is what's going to happen to you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's easy to understand it if you look at it in that way.
Okay. Thank you.
Now I easily understand it. At 13, it was like, what are you talking about a vine for?
Yeah, and a bird, and
Yes.
cedars of Lebanon, and I guess the east wind. The east wind, I suppose, is always a dry wind because that's coming off the desert. Wouldn't that be Maury for the people in Jerusalem? They always talk about the east wind withering.
Yeah, well, like you say, it comes off the desert, it's sort of like a north wind.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's the way it doesn't come that way, it comes from Mediterranean to the west.
Mm-hmm. Any other comments on this?
Well, I took it that it was country, Jerusalem being taken over by
Mm-hmm.
Babylon.
That's right.
And I just, what I got out of it was that there is a remnant that is saved, even though everything is taken and being destroyed.
That's right. Now.
There are two, maybe there's two plantings there.
Yeah.
One was the tree,
That's right.
and then the other is the vine. The vine seems to fit better in the desert pretty well,
That's right.
but the other one, I'm not sure about. Is that Egypt?
Oh, that's right. So if you remember the story, if you remember the history, you've got the always present quest for markers that work. You've got Assyria. So you've got Assyria, and Assyria had destroyed the northern kingdom. You've got Babylon, and you've got Egypt, you've got Israel, the northern kingdom, and you've got Judah.
And you have Lebanon too, because that's where that first one came from,
Right. Now
which is up there.
Now Lebanon is interesting because we're gonna have to, as we kind of parse this out. So the Assyrian Empire rose and destroyed the kingdom of Israel and scattered its people and took other people from other conquered lands and placed them in the region. That's the origin of the Samaritans that we find in Jesus' time. Okay? Assyria was also putting pressure on Judah. And so Judah, but Judah held out. Judah didn't, they became a vassal, but they basically survived as a nation. Then Babylon was ascending and rising. And so Judah was afraid of Assyria, and Babylon was now putting pressure on Assyria, and Assyria looked like it was going to fall. Now this caused Egypt concern, because Egypt was worried that if Babylon grew strong, Babylon would, like Assyria, come down in here. So Egypt is playing a balancing game. So Egypt sends up an army to support Assyria against Babylon. Judah is worried about Assyria, not worried about Babylon. King Hezekiah let Babylonian envoys come and visit the nation. Judah is worried about Assyria. Judah doesn't want Egypt supporting Assyria against Babylon. Judah and Egypt are playing balancing games. Judah basically wants all of these powers to be weak so that it can have its own space. So Egypt sends up an army. Josiah marches out. Battle of Megiddo. Judah loses the battle. Josiah is killed. And Babylon, Egypt is able to get up there. But Babylon still, it's not a definitive victory, but basically Babylon doesn't lose. And Assyria continues to crumble. And Egypt continues to be dysfunctional, and Babylon continues to rise. Then Josiah is gone, and Judah's oldest son, I'm trying to remember this history. Josiah has 3 sons. His oldest son, who is the best son, when they lose the battle, if I remember correctly, I think he gets hauled off to Egypt, basically. Babylon reasserts itself over here, and Judah does a stupid thing because what Judah wants is its independence, by rebelling against Babylon, and Babylon takes son number 2 up to Babylon with royals and prominent people. That's the first image of the...
That's when Daniel goes up there.
Yeah. That's the eagle ripping the top of the cedar of Lebanon from Lebanon. Now, it's saying Lebanon, but it's really meaning this area down here. So that's the first image of the eagle ripping the top of the tree and bringing it to Babylon. It's confusing because then suddenly we start talking about vines. And so the idea is that it's kind of like a dream. We began talking about cedar trees and the top being broken off and being taken. Well, that's son number 2 being taken to Babylon. And Babylon then leaves son number 3 in charge of Judah. And that's where we switch to the vines. And if you remember, the exiles go to Babylon. And if you remember Jeremiah, the prophecy is seek the favor of the city, seek the welfare of the city, flourish in Babylon for now. And so there you have the vine, and the vine is flourishing. It's by water. It's going well. But now another eagle appears. Well, what's that eagle? That eagle is Egypt. So now Judah, under son number 3, is looking at its situation and thinking, Babylon is the threat. So I want to find another power to offset Babylon. And so son number 3 starts thinking about Egypt and starts cozying up to Egypt. Babylon sees Judah cozying up to Egypt. Babylon comes down in 586 BC, sets up the siege ramp, destroys Jerusalem, destroys the temple. The king does not escape, gets hauled up to Babylon, and basically has his sons killed, and then his eyes plucked out. Very famous story. So that's essentially what most of this story is about. So you have the trees, and then the vines, and all of this is dealing with this political history. And then you get to the end section, where we go back to the trees. So you start out with the word of the Lord, and you talk about the parable. So you have this great eagle that takes, with beautiful plumage, takes from the top of a cedar, broke off the topmost part, carries it away to the land of merchants and the city of traders. That's Babylon. Again, there's a big empire theme in this. Now again, if you read the book of Revelation, what is Babylon? If you read the book of Revelation, you find all of this story of traders and merchants and commerce. This is all very vivid in the book of Revelation. And it's the whore of Babylon, Babylon the Great. Now, obviously, in the book of Revelation, they're more talking about Rome, but the image is the same. So Ezekiel is talking about all of this history and all of this politics going around him. And then you switch to the vines. And the vine is planted in Babylon, but it starts looking to Egypt. And that then gets cut off. Verse 11. Then the word of the Lord came to me. Say this to the rebellious people. Do you not know what these things mean? Say to them, the king of Babylon went to Jerusalem and carried off her king and her nobles, bringing them back with him to Babylon. Then he took a member of the royal family and made a treaty with him and put him under oath. That's son number 3 here. He carried him away, carried away the leading men of the land, and went up to Babylon. The king rebelled against him, sending his envoys to Egypt to get horses and a large army. Will he succeed? And the answer is no. And that's in fact what happens. He doesn't succeed. And the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, comes down and destroys Jerusalem. And this is, again, so as surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, he shall die in Babylon, in the land of the king who put him on the throne, whose oath he despised and whose treaty he broke. Pharaoh with his mighty army and great horde will be of no help to him in war, when ramps are built and siege engines erected to destroy many lives. He despised the oath by breaking the covenant, because he had given his hand in pledge, yet did all these things. He shall not escape. Therefore, this is what the Lord, sovereign Lord, says. As surely as I live, I will repay him for despising my oath and breaking my covenant. I will spread my net for him, and he will be caught in my snare. I will bring him to Babylon and execute judgment on him there, because he was unfaithful to me. All his choice troops will fall by the sword, and his survivors will be scattered to the winds. Then you will know that I, the Lord, have spoken. Okay. Now you've been hearing that refrain throughout the book. What's the point of that refrain in this context?
This is before this happened.
That's right. So he's basically saying, this is what's going to happen. It's going to be a disaster, but you will know that I'm speaking through my prophet. Now in verse 22, we switch back to the initial image with the trees from the vines. This is what the sovereign Lord says. I myself will take a shoot from the very top of a cedar and plant it. I will break off a tender... Okay, now let's pause here. Because So the story started, and we had... Basically, we've had plants, and so we've had trees, and we've had vines. What other things have we had in this story?
Eagles.
Eagles. Okay. Now, eagle, throughout, symbol of the United States. Look on the,
E pluribus unum.
E pluribus unum. You look on the, before they started putting all the things on the quarters, if you find an old quarter, you got George Washington on the front side. What's on the back side?
Eagle.
An eagle. Why?
It represents something.
It represents something, doesn't it? These are symbols of empire. If you look at Nazi Germany and the standards that they had marching around, what's always on top of the Nazi Germany, the Nazi standard? It's an eagle. If you looked at the Romans, Jesus says, birds have nests, foxes have dens. Now you might ask, why did Jesus pick those two animals? Everyone in Judea would have understood fox, because there was someone that was known as the fox. Anybody know who was the fox in Jesus' time?
Yeah, Herod.
Herod was the fox. Herod was building palaces all over the place, palaces and fortresses. Foxes have dens, but Herod has lots of palaces and hiding holes. The Romans came with their legions, and in front of the legion, the marching, they have a standard, and on top of the standard is a what?
Eagle.
It's an eagle. Now, why are eagles imagined so repetitively in this way?
They're pretty powerful birds.
They are.
And they also are predators.
Yeah.
Fly.
They fly. In a sense, they transcend. You know, it's a running joke with Tolkien that it seems that whenever Tolkien's characters in The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings get in a spot, the eagles swoop in and rescue them. Now, there's something to this. And so here in this story, the eagle takes the top of the tree of Lebanon. Okay, now, there's also in this story a sense of rootedness, because what are the difference between plants and eagles?
Plants have root, stay someplace.
They stay someplace. They're kind of a function of the land. Eagles, they fly above the land. Now it's very interesting that very clearly in these parables, these two eagles are Babylon, it's very clear because it tells us, and Egypt. And these are understood to be empires. Well, again, what's the difference between an empire and a kingdom generally?
The empire is bigger. It's usually composed of a number of kingdoms.
That's right. The difference between an emperor and a king is an emperor is a king of kings and a lord of lords. Right? And so Nebuchadnezzar puts kings in place. Caesar puts kings in place. And if you read the history of the Roman Empire, there's kings all over the place, but everybody understands who the King of Kings is. Now again, when we listen to this language, when I say King of Kings and Lord of Lords, all of your minds immediately go to Jesus. So now it's interesting in the story that the eagle, so the story starts with an eagle plucking off the top of the cedar, taking it to Babylon, and then the parable, first it's told as a parable, and then the parable is interpreted for us. And so first we talk about eagles, and then we talk about trees, and then we talk about vines, and then we talk back about eagles. And basically, at the end of the story, it says basically, this is what's going to happen. Egypt isn't going to rescue Judah. Babylon is going to come down with its siege engines and destroy Judah. Then you will know that I spoke. Okay. And then it shifts. And now suddenly, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I myself will take a shoot from the very top of a cedar and plant it. Okay. Where have we seen this before in this story?
The shoot of Jesse.
Well, okay, that's not in this story. That's in the book of Isaiah, but it's the same idea. That the eagle, that's how chapter 17 starts. With the eagle taking the top. So
If he takes the top of the tree off, will the tree continue to live, or is it going to kind of wither and die eventually?
Well, this is, and that's, we kind of work this, we can't help but think that way. This is part of our culture in terms of how we think. But if you look at the whole picture of what it says, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I myself will take a shoot from the very top of a cedar and will plant it. I will break off a tender sprig from its foremost shoots and plant it on a high and lofty mountain. On the mountain heights of Israel I will plant it. It will produce branches and bear fruit and become a splendid cedar. Birds of every kind will nest in it, and they will find shelter in the shade of its branches. All the trees of the forest will know that I, the Lord, bring down... Okay, let's pause at verse 23. If you remember, in the book of Daniel, there's a vision. Daniel chapter, let's go with 3. No, there's the fiery furnace. That's not it. Chapter 4, here's chapter 4, that's what I was thinking about.
Dream of a tree.
The dream of the tree.
What was that? What chapter was that?
Chapter 4, Daniel chapter 4. King Nebuchadnezzar, to the nations and peoples of every language who live on all the earth. Okay. Now again, if you look at the book of Revelation, all of this is familiar. All this, peoples of every language and culture and so on and so forth. May you prosper greatly. It is my pleasure to tell you about the miraculous signs and wonders that the Most High God has performed for me. How great are his signs, how mighty his wonders. His kingdom is an eternal kingdom. His dominion endures from generation to generation. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at home in my palace, contented and prosperous. I had a dream and it made me afraid. I was lying in bed and its images terrified me. Then he goes on, and then finally Daniel can come, and Daniel can interpret the dream. These are the visions I saw while lying on bed. I looked, and there stood before me a tree in the middle of the land. Its height was enormous. Its trees grew large and strong, and its top touched the sky. It was visible to the ends of the earth. Its leaves were beautiful, its fruit abundant, and on it was food for all. Under it the wild animals found shelter, and birds lived in its branches, and every creature was fed. Okay. Book of Revelation. You get to the end of the story, and there's a tree in the book of Revelation too, isn't there? All this Babylon stuff, all this judgment stuff, new heavens and a new earth. I will wipe away every tear. He who is on the throne, the Alpha and the Omega, the bride of Christ, the new Jerusalem, the wall of the city, the measurements, temple. I do not see a temple in the city. Now, what do I keep telling you and reminding you about the Garden of Eden? What isn't there in the Garden of Eden? There's no temple in the Garden of Eden. There's no altar in the Garden of Eden. Why not?
Can meet God directly.
That's right, because God is there. Eden restored. Then the Lord, chapter 22, then the angel showed me a river of the water of life. It was clear as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and the Lamb down the middle of the great street of the city. On each side of the river stood the tree of life. Now, let's pause there. Think about that for a minute. On each side of the river stood the tree of life. How does that work? How many sides of a river are there?
Two.
How does a tree stand on both sides of the river?
It's over.
It's tricky.
Well, maybe the river was very narrow.
Yeah, we wouldn't think the river of life would be too narrow there. We would think it would be, and then, well, yeah, you might. And so then, when artists try to picture this, then they have, they have it divided and it comes over, and that's one way to think about it. But the point, and this is exactly the issue with all of these images. They're designed to evoke. Now, why is there a tree here in the New Jerusalem? There's a tree, and there's a river, and there's fruit. And, well, the whole Bible started talking about what? Trees and fruits and rivers, right? You read Genesis chapter 2. Why all this imagery? Why the same imagery in Daniel chapter 4 with Nebuchadnezzar and his dream and this tree which grows and in its branches the people of the earth dwell and feeds everyone. And even if you look at, it's very, very interesting because if you look at, for example, Norse mythology and some Chinese myths, again and again you have this idea that the universe is a tree. Why these images? Why do these images talk to one another? And how do these images make us feel?
Well, it makes me understand it better because I can relate to a tree and how it branches out and it keeps branching out. And so it ties all the stories together.
Yes, it does.
One thing, a tree gives life, usually. Fruit and shade and shelter.
Let's imagine and we can deal with this, and let's imagine you're out here in California and you're walking around a vast open space. What are your enemies?
Everything.
Everything.
Wild beasts.
Wild beasts. You're out a vast open space. You can be seen. The sun is beating down on you. You're getting dehydrated. So you're walking through this vast open space and suddenly out from nowhere you see a tree. And if you're thirsty, probably one of the first things you'll think is,
There's some water.
There's some water there because there's a tree there. And so you go to that tree and the tree offers you shelter. And if there's fruit on the tree, it offers you something to eat. And it offers you shade. And if an animal comes, you can climb the tree. It offers you protection. So these images are not random. Go ahead, Marty.
But is it also a vision of God's kingdom?
Yes. And so when you get here to the end of the chapter in Ezekiel, the end of chapter in Ezekiel 17, this is exactly the image. Because we had all this business of the eagle and ripping off the top of the tree and the vines being opportunists and choosing one or the other. And then it closes. This is what the sovereign Lord says. I myself will take a shoot from the very top of a cedar and plant it. So God is acting like an emperor. But it's going to be a different empire. This is the whole story of the book of Daniel. It's the whole story of the book of Revelation. And it's in fact the story of Jesus. Because when Jesus gets tried with Pilate, what are the charges against Jesus brought by the Sanhedrin?
You said he was a king.
He said he was a king. And so they bring him before Pilate. They say, he says he's a king. Well, why would that get you in trouble?
Only Caesar's king.
Only Caesar gets to say who's king. And so Pilate asks him, are you a king? Jesus says, you say I am. What's going on here? Now, I, the sovereign Lord, will take a shoot from the very top of a cedar, and I will break off a tender sprig of its topmost shoot and plant it on a high and lofty mountain. So again, we've got more imagery, because we've got trees as imagery of the kingdom. Go again in the book of Daniel, you'll see a boulder comes off, and that boulder grows into a mountain. Mountains are imageries of the kingdom.
That's almost break off a tender sprig from the top, but that reminds me of Jesus.
That's right. On the mountain heights of Israel, I will plant it, and it will produce branches and bear fruit and become a splendid cedar. Birds of every kind will nest in it, and they will find shelter in the shades of its branches. There's the tree from the book of from Daniel 4. There's the tree from Revelation 22 in the New Jerusalem. But who produces this?
The Lord.
The Lord. And you might say, well, that's unusual. And it said, no, it isn't unusual. Verse 24, all of the trees of the forest will know that I, the Lord, bring down the tall tree and make the low tree grow tall. I dry up the green tree and make the dry tree flourish. I, the Lord, have spoken and will do it. What's the point of this chapter?
I think despite what's going on in the world, I'm still in control.
That's exactly right. So the people, okay, where does this entire, who's speaking in this, I mean, literally, who's speaking this parable? Where is he and who is he? It's in the book of what? Ezekiel. And where is Ezekiel? He's in a refugee camp outside of Babylon. He's been plucked. He is part of that tree that was plucked by the eagle and planted. We know that Ezekiel is over by a drainage ditch. So he's by water. And he's told to flourish there. But now Ezekiel, he gets plucked before he's 30. What would happen if he were at home and times were normal in Jerusalem? At 30, he gets to be what?
A man.
A priest who serves in the temple. He doesn't get to do that. He's plucked. And he's out there in Babylon. And here the news is, well, guess what's going to happen? The idiot in Jerusalem, the idiot king, is going to rebel against Nebuchadnezzar. Bad move. And he's going to try and side with Egypt to get Egypt to bolster you. Bad move. Egypt isn't going to rescue you. Babylon is going to come down, and he's going to bring his siege engines, and he's going to bring down the wall of Jerusalem, and he's going to march his armies in, and he's going to take apart the temple. Now, they could have easily said, not one stone will be left on another. Who does that sound like?
The end of time.
Matthew 24. preaching on Matthew 25 in the service today. Jesus says that Jesus is walking with his disciples in Jerusalem, and they're oohing and eyeing at what Herod has done with the temple. These huge stones, and Jesus says, not one stone will be left on another. Now that doesn't literally happen. The Wailing Wall persists. But the point of what Jesus was saying was true. This is going to be, you're oohing and eyeing at this temple. It's going to get taken out. When Jesus comes and curses the fig tree, when Jesus comes and clears the temple, he's saying the temple will go, but a new kingdom will come, and a new emperor will come. Who is that emperor going to be? Jesus. But here's the question. What kind of emperor will he be? This is the entire question of the gospel stories. Because in a sense, that the gospel stories are a tale of two emperors. One emperor is in Rome, and he has buildings and armies and palaces. The other emperor, eagles have perches. Foxes have dens, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. Well, who's the Son of Man? Daniel chapter 7. The Son of Man is this one who's given an eternal kingdom. And so, New Testament Christians would read Ezekiel 17 and say, I see Jesus. Jesus is the sprout of the tree that's planted on a high mountain in Jerusalem. And he becomes the tree. He becomes the mountain. He becomes the kingdom. Now, again, little perspective. Here we are. I mean, these would be incredibly audacious things to say by any standard. If I were to say, I will be king forever, forever's a long time. Hitler, with his eagles, tried to establish the Third Reich. Well, what were Reichs 1 and 2? So Hitler wanted to have the Third Reich, right? What's the First Reich?
World War I, World War II.
Roman Empire. Roman Empire lasts 1,000 years. Very impressive. What's the Second Reich? The Holy Roman Empire. Charlemagne. Over Germany, Austria, that whole central part of Europe. Hitler says, I'm going to establish the Third Reich. And it will last 1,000 years. Hitler came into office in what year? 33, I believe. And he lasted until 45. Now they got 12 years out of the deal. Caused the death of how many people? Nikita Khrushchev says to Kennedy, what? We will bury you. Now, Soviet, 1919 to 1987 maybe? That's a pretty long reign. It's nothing like 1,000. But boy, Hitler, big deal. Communism, big deal.
How about democracy?
Yeah. How about our empires, our eagles? Big deal. How long will they last? And here you have this audacious claim that, and we say it so mindlessly, Jesus is Lord. No one in the first century would say that mindlessly, because to say it had consequences. Well, if you're in China today, be a little careful how you talk about Jesus. If you're in many places of the world today, be a little careful how you talk about Jesus. Here in the United States, say it like it doesn't mean much. But isn't it fascinating how these stories, because you read this story, like you said, you kind of read it, and we got these eagles and these trees, then we got these vines, and then we've got all of these politics of the 6th century BC, and then at the end there's this little section, and God takes the role of an eagle, and he takes a sprig, and he plants it, and it becomes a tree on a mountain. What does it mean? Well, it only means something if you understand the rest of the book. Here's the crazy thing. So we're sitting in a room right now, and I'm the youngest here in this room, and I'm 54, and all of you have years of reading the Bible. So when I say things like King of Kings and Lord of Lords, you think Jesus. And when I talk about trees and mountains and Revelation, and I say, what's the first tree in the Bible you can think of? Boom, your minds go all the way back to the Garden of Eden. You know these stories. You've been taught these stories. This is the language of the Bible. And all of it has meaning and connections. And it's actually told in a way that ancient people would have understood.